50th anniversary, of course, of all of the Kennedy events, and I'm sure that's been in the news and you've noticed it, and it caused me to go back through some of my files this week. And as I was reviewing my files on President John F. Kennedy, I came across something that he said that really spoke to me and impressed me greatly. You may recall these words. He said at one point, "If we cannot end our differences," he told a crowd of international representatives, "at least," he said, "we can make the world safe for diversity." And I think that's a wonderful idea. I hope diversity is something that all of us here welcome and appreciate, because the truth is that diversity is a fact which we simply cannot deny. It is a blessing which we would be poorer without. Now, one of the most wonderful columns about this that I ever discovered happened to come from Ellen Goodman. Maybe you read her stuff in your paper. She's terrific. A few years ago, she wrote a column about Thanksgiving entitled "Diversity Happens." Almost bumper sticker language. And I want to share part of that with you because it is beautiful and very appropriate for us. She said the following, and I've cut out a bunch of stuff, but this is more or less the gist of what she said. "We are in the kitchen, running the numbers. It is our annual prep course at Thanksgiving Central, where we major in list making. The final count, 21 people, 2 tables, 19 chairs, 1 piano bench, 21 napkins, and 63 pieces of silverware if you include the 2 spoons that are mangled in the disposal. My husband goes to the cupboard and adds up the glasses, 18 that match and 6 orphans. I subtract the napkins, still missing, 1 polka dot square unaccounted for, 3 plain ones just disappeared. These numbers accumulated in my brain," she writes, "until I began to feel as if I were compiling some of the statistical portraits of a great event. I imagine next," she says, "a statistical chart describing the people who will fill those 21 seats. A numerical profile of one very extended American family. Geography, 5 area codes. Countries of origin, 6 to 10, depending on how you count. Age, from single digits to the 90s. Religion, 2 to 4, again, depending on how you figure denominations and whether you include none of the above. Marital status, single, married, divorced, remarried, widowed. Occupations, 2 teachers and 1 artist, 2 lawyers, 3 who work in sales, and 3 who work in words. Thanksgiving eating habits, 2 vegetarians, 6 white meat eaters, more drumstick lovers than drumsticks, 4 who will, of their own volition, eat the string bean casserole, 15 devotees of lemon pie, and 3 attitudes towards gravy. This, she says, is how we add up for Thanksgiving, the most American of holidays. Running these numbers, she writes, gives her a different impression of America than some may have had in the past. Today, she says, we are told that America is threatened by its diversity. It's said routinely that this country is impossibly fractured, subdivided across dozens of fault lines, with people unable to talk across the fences of our differences. If you read the numbers, she says, on public opinions, our diversity sounds like a formula for disaster. The only belief Americans seem to hold in common is the belief that we have little in common. Indeed, she says, the image of family itself is, in this, the great endless family debates, values struggle, almost invariably a homogeneous one. The ideal families, some claim at least, are single units held together by some natural umbilical cord, an effortless affinity. They are families that exhibit the easy togetherness of birds of a feather. Well, she said, maybe some families. Maybe there are families, she says, where all the members truly agree on everything, from politics to pumpkin pie, families that think and act as one. But there are others, she says, where homogeneity is enforced and everyone plays follow the leader. There are everybody must have Spanish families, where those who cannot eat off the same life menu find themselves unwelcome. But, she says, the families that I have known are no more homogeneous than the individuality of their members. Whatever similarities of blood or background, there are as many differences within families as between them. Such families are, in fact, she says, our models of diversity. It is in families, she claims, that our children first struggle with the need to be themselves and the need to belong. At the kitchen table, we first find out if we can be accepted as who we are and still be connected to our families. Then she says, when families work, they acknowledge individuality, make room for difference, weave family stories out of eccentricities. When families work, the members make a commitment to stay at the table. So the best hope, she says, the best training ground for a country as diverse as ours is not in the homogeneous poster family of our nostalgia. It is in real families where we first learn to live together with our differences, where we teach each other and we hear each other. Run the numbers any way you want, she says. But this season, I am drawn most optimistically to the family gatherings where we can fill our plates according to our own palates and still satisfy the appetites for togetherness. In this America, she says, there is always room for one more at the table. Isn't that beautiful? Now, you know what Ellen Goodman wrote about the family applies equally as well to unitarian-universalism. And that is what I want us to think about for a few moments today. For our religion constitutes a spiritual family whose diversity is a thing of beauty, and I would tell you, a joy to behold. Now, if you go to any of our annual General Assemblies and you look around, you will see men and women of every age, some with partners and some single. You will see parents and some folks who are not parents. All of these folks will come from many different geographical areas, and they will have all manner of varied backgrounds. Some will be hourly wage earners, and others salaried professionals. Some will be high school dropouts, and others will have advanced degrees. There will be computer programmers, as well as concert pianists, artists, as well as agriculturalists, musicians and maintenance managers, painters and professors, lawyers and librarians, city planners and caregivers, workers and retirees, children and great-grandparents, persons of modest means and persons very well off. These and so many more are the people who make up Unitarian Universalism. Now, as different from one another as we are yet united in our diversity by our shared belief in religious freedom. And that is what brings us together. Unlike many in America, we all agree that mere unorthodoxy or dissent from the prevailing mores is not to be condemned. Indeed, we understand that the absence of such voices would be a symptom of a grave illness in our society. If As Archibald MacLeish once said, a dissenter is someone who resigns from the herd and thinks for himself. Then all you use are dissenters of one sort or another. But that's all right. For one could make a very strong case for the proposition that all of the real heroes of science, of the arts, and of the professions have themselves all been dissenters. Now, in discussing the United States Constitution, James Madison once wrote this, quote, "While we assert a freedom to embrace, to profess, and to observe the religion which we believe, we cannot deny an equal freedom to those whose minds have not yet yielded to the evidence which has convinced us." And that same philosophy is why there are within Unitarian Universalism Jews as well as Christians, atheists as well as theists, pagans as well as humanists, because we all understand that tolerance requires respect for other persons. Now, Unitarian Universalism has a reputation for being liberal. Wonderful word. And indeed, it always has been historically liberal in some respects, but not in every respect. In the distant past, for example, if believing in hell could be considered conservative, then Unitarians were conservative long after their Universalist counterparts became liberal by rejecting the doctrine of eternal damnation. If, on the other hand, belief in the divinity of Jesus were to be considered conservative, then Universalists were conservative long after their Unitarian counterparts became liberal by denying the Trinity. And similarly, throughout our denomination's history, there have always been some people on the conservative side of each and every issue, and some people on the liberal. And that fact remains true today. If you mention any issue, doesn't matter what it is, abolition of landmines, affirmative action, animal rights, capital punishment, euthanasia, same-sex marriage, gun control, mass transit versus private automobile use, getting energy from nuclear reactors, whether being a Democrat or a Republican is the better choice. Any of these things and many others, you will find that not every Unitarian Universalist agrees with every other Unitarian Universalist. Some of us are theologically liberal and also socially liberal. But there are others among us who are liberal theologically and yet conservative on social issues. And there is simply no homogeneity among us when it comes to individual issues. Our unity lies not in the specifics, but in the broad policy of toleration of differences. And that is the basis of our historic liberalism. Such toleration of pluralism is not found in conservative groups or churches. There, unanimity may be found, but it almost always comes with a very high price. Homogeneity costs nothing less than the abandonment of reason and the abdication of free will. The only alternative to such stultifying sameness is the pluralistic diversity that we struggle and struggle and struggle with, and yet pride ourselves for as Unitarian Universalists. It is precisely in order to be free and rational and to be respected as persons no matter what our views. These are the things that draw us here to this, our spiritual home. There are, of course, inevitably rough spots along the way of this kind of diversity, which is why Unitarian Thomas Jefferson once said, "When angry, count 10 before you speak. If very angry, 100. Sometimes we are even tempted to imagine that things might be more wonderful somewhere else. Laura Richards tells a very nice little story about a little boy who thought like that. He worked long and hard every day beside his poor parents in the field of their very tiny farm. And as a treat, his father would allow him to rest for an hour just at sunset each afternoon. That was the boy's personal special time. For it was then that he could go to the top of a nearby hill and look across at another hill which rose some miles away. And on that other hill there stood a house with windows of gold and of diamonds. And they shone so brightly that the boy had to blink just to look at them. Well, then one day, the story goes, as a reward for his help, the boy's father gave him a holiday from work. Not wanting to waste a moment, the boy set out to find the house with the golden window. After what seemed a very long time to him, of walking and walking, he finally arrived at the house. And much to his surprise, the windows were all made of clear glass. There was no gold to be seen anywhere, and the boy was very disappointed. In fact, he began to weep. And about that time, there came from the house the little girl who lived there. They greeted each other and they sat down upon the porch, and the boy told her about seeing a house with golden windows. And she nodded, for she knew all about that. But she said, "You've got the wrong house." Taking him by the hand, she took him to a nearby hill near her house, and she said, "You can only see it at sunset." And it was almost that time already. And so, as they reached the top of the hill, she turned him around and pointed to the top of another hill. And there was indeed a house with windows of gold and of diamonds, just as he had seen it. It was so beautiful and so bright that they had to shade their eyes. And then as the sun went down, the gold and the glitter faded away, until finally they could both see the house itself. And to his astonishment, the little boy realized it was his house. Well, that was also the lesson that was not lost on Thomas Jefferson. He said, "The happiest moments of my life have been the few which I have passed at home in the bosom of my family." Though he was no doubt referring to his own blood relations, the same could be said by most of us about our spiritual home within Unitarian Universalism. "Happy is the house that shelters a friend," wrote Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson. "A friend," he said, "is a person with whom I may be sincere. Before him I may think aloud. A friend may well be," he reckoned, "the masterpiece of nature." Emerson gave quite a lot of very careful thought to the idea of friendship. He knew, for example, that the only way to have a friend is to be one. Most pertinent to the message that I want to bring you today are some of the words from his famous essay entitled "Friendship." These are fairly short, but this is what he said. "I awoke this morning with devout thanksgiving for my friends, the old ones and the new. I chide society, I embrace solitude, and yet I am not so ungrateful as not to see the wise, the lovely, and the noble-minded. Who hears me, who understands me, becomes mine, a possession for all time. Nor is nature so poor, but she gives me this joy several times over. And thus we weave social threads of our own, a new web of relations. My friends have come to me unsought. By the divine affinity of virtue with itself, I find them, or rather not I, but the deity in me, and in them derides and cancels the thick walls of individual character, relation, age, sex, circumstance, and now makes many one. High thanks I owe you, excellent lovers, who carry out the world for me to new and noble depths, and enlarge the meaning of all of my thoughts. These friends," he said, "are poetry, hymn, and ode. Will they separate themselves from me? I know not, but I fear it not. For my relation to them is so pure that we hold by simple affinity. And my life, being thus social, The same affinity will exert its energy on whomsoever is as noble as these men and women. Emerson would have felt right at home within today's Unitarian Universalism, with all of our dialogues and debates, with all of our differences and discussions, and especially with our unity amidst diversity. Remember what this religion means to you. Think of it as your spiritual home, as your religious family. And then remember Ellen Goodman's words, which I tell you again only in a paraphrase, where she might have said this about us, had she been one of us at that time. When spiritual families work, they acknowledge individuality, they make room for difference, and they weave family stories out of eccentricities. When spiritual families work, their members make a commitment to stay at the table. Run the numbers any way you want, and then ask yourself, aren't you drawn most to a religion where you will fill your own spiritual plates according to your own palates, and still satisfy your appetite for togetherness? Because we are committed to diversity as Unitarian Universalists, there will always be room for one more at our table. Happy Thanksgiving.